So I'm moving here. Okay, not exactly here. This is so Nordic Noir. Look at them dark clouds. They're there for me. I'll tell you about Siglufjörður. So we're over here. My favorite town in Iceland. Why? Well, we're gonna find out. But it's a place I hope to call home one day. Because one of my favorite books is set right here, which got me curious. Why is Nordic Noir so popular, and why do I love it so much? Hi, I'm Kamari, your modern-day Nordic explorer. In the summer of 2021, while camper vanning around Iceland, I made my very first trip to Siglufjörður, and I sure was excited. He describes as a small, sleepy town, so of course I had to come visit it. However, this town is effing adorable. I ran around that tiny town like a kid in a candy store, falling in love with each new find. There were so many moments where I was like, this town just gets me. You hear that? They were playing Hamilton, helpless. We're destined to live here. I should mention I love Hamilton. I've said it a half dozen times. I love the charm of that place so much, I came back that winter. So I should mention I've been to Iceland over a dozen times at this point. And even though I desperately want to move here and I've been all over the country, I haven't figured out where exactly yet. And when I returned, I felt even more under its spell. Life's pretty good right now. Frozen sprouts eyes, which I love. I love frozen sprouts. I'm hardcore, so empty. But look at these mountains. Look at this. Look. So now, the northernmost town on mainland Iceland, buying that property, definitely happening, is where I hope to call home one day. And with 1,300 people, and it is the perfect size town for me and Flucky. The real one back home with my parents and the stand-in. So what actually brought me up here? Well, it was this book. Or rather, this series of books. So I have an obsession, and it's not just with 66 dwarfs. Back here. Also, and me, and my socks. Can you see my socks? Hopefully you got that. Been trying to get them to sponsor me for years, and I'm still available if you're watching. But my obsession is not just with this brand, also with Nordic Noir. My introduction to Nordic Noir was through the series by Ragnar Jonasson, one of my favorite authors. And it's based here, a quiet, unassuming sleeping village. Or at least that's how Ragnar describes it, as the main character Ari moves here to take his very first police posting. The roofs of the town's houses are rendered dull by the gloom, and a light covering of snow lay over its gardens. Would he really be able to see this strange place with an impressive fjord as home? So I love Nordic Noir. Within my collection back home, which I don't even know where it is these days, it's about half. So I can't believe I went with this obsession, right? I mean, not just with 66 Noir, but with Nordic Noir, of course. So what are we doing this episode? So I want to learn actually what makes Nordic Noir, more about the history, where does it come from? I want to know why is it so popular with locals, Nordic people, and also an international audience like me. And probably most importantly, I want to figure out why am I so obsessed with it? So between my research, conversations with some authors, and attendance at Iceland Noir in Reykjavik, basically a Nordic Noir festival for superfans like me, we might just have all the answers. So we're going to start from the beginning because my buddy here, and maybe you do too, want to know what Nordic Noir is. So many sites and critiques have varying definitions of what it means, but let's take Penguin, Random House, the verb, and Wikipedia to create our own. So as a subset of crime fiction, written from a police point of view, focused on a brutal crime, and based, you already guessed, Scandinavian or Nordic countries. So actually there's a difference between the two, which we're going to cover in a future video. Maybe, hey, it's already out now, and you'll see, maybe be surprised at the description. Probably just check anyways, never know. So it's historically been associated with Sweden. However, over the last 3 decades, you are seeing a rise of authors from the other Nordic countries. You actually may know the most popular one, or one of the more popular ones, Stieg Larrson, who created Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and the whole Millennium Trilogy.
I think he was ahead of his time. It's a masterpiece. It has everything in that book that has happened in the past 15 years. Before the Me Too movement, before the Nordic Noir became super popular, he did it all, and then he died.
That's Satu. She's from Finland and moved to Iceland over 15 years ago. She recently published her first Nordic Noir piece, or as she likes to call it, Nordic Blue, Hildur. Hello. So I've discovered in my research that there are 5 key ingredients to Nordic Noir.
Snow, isolation, social ills, imperfect protagonist, grim.
Did you catch all that? I'm kidding. Don't worry, we're going to go over each one. Number 1, a brutal crime. So think like misogyny, all the fun ones. But it's actually less about the crime itself and more about the psychology motivation of the person who did it. This is something that actually resonates really strongly with me because over the years, I've really come to appreciate psychological thrillers in movies and books. And I don't know if that makes me a crazy person. Maybe it does, and I just outed myself on camera. It's fine. That's what we're here to discuss. Everybody else's obsession with Nordic Noir, not just mine. Number 2, a bleak, dark, and somber setting. It usually takes place in a remote landscape, kind of like this. Also on bladed, unassuming streets, which we will find. Also, well, there's catalyst too, like our wit here. So let's take Jar City by Arnold Indresson. The first 50 pages are basically a love letter to rain. I'm kidding, but it does rain a lot of Reykjavik. Case in point, me the other day. Okay, maybe not the best proof, but I promise it was raining. I did learn from the authors, though, that nature is considered another character in the book. And lastly, there's Trap. Yeah, I know I'm jumping ahead by talking about TV already, but the entire show is based in this town. And if you've seen the show, you might recognize something behind me. And that one, too. The entire show is actually based on a snowstorm blocking people from entering and leaving the town, which, again, I'm trying to move here, so I wouldn't mind that. For me, this all kind of checks. I don't like the sun. I don't like summer. I don't like finding a lot of people either. So for me, kind of this isolation sounds pretty lovely. I feel like this actually might be my ideal place. Or the West Fjords, because not a lot of people live there either. So I think you're starting to see why I love the North. And I'm starting to see why I love Nordic Noir. Number 3, a troubled and tortured protagonist who basically hides in the bushes. I'm kidding. Or in the words of my favorite author,
detective type of thing.
That's Ursa. And she's not only an award-winning author, but one of the biggest Nordic Noir writers in Iceland. So the detective has a very painful past, and they're almost like bearing witness to the battles, or basically playing out against the backdrop of the crime itself. And this actually makes the characters more relatable. So let's take Erlander from Jar City. So he has a terrible relationship with his ex-wife. He's estranged from his kids. His daughter is a drug addict, which honestly is like the least of her problems in most of the books. Basically a very deeply tortured character. Every book that I read, I just can't help but root for the guy and hoping that things turn around. I never really do, which is just basically life. I'm kidding. I'm not pessimistic at all. A solid and dramatic plot with many twists and turns. So let's take The Island by Ragnar Jonasson. The island is based on one of many small islands surrounding the Westman archipelago off the south coast of Iceland. All of these islands only contain one single house, or only one way up, a rope. There are 4 people who go on the island. Only 3 make it off, which means only 3 possible people who committed the crime. And I was guessing to the very end, and I was still wrong. This is something that I actually realized. I really love stories where I'm actually following along with the main character to solve the mystery. It actually keeps me more engaged and on my toes. But I'm old, so I feel like I should be laying down a lot more. I'm always tired, guys. I need a Red Bull. I'm kidding. I used to work for Red Bull, so I used to get it free now to pay for it, which I adamantly hate doing. Anyways, let's continue with the story.
I think that crime novels are able to tell something about society in a very straightforward way.
That's Nina. She's a Danish author who began writing 7 years ago. She spent more than 20 years working in and out of Nunarbud, or more commonly known as Greenland, where our publisher is based. Now, my work in the country has led me to prefer using Nunarbud. For this episode, I will use the common terminology of Greenland. So number 5, which is arguably the most important element, a social critique. However, I'm going to come back to that a little bit and talk about it more in depth. I also need to grab lunch because I'm starving, and it's a lot of effort filming this story for you guys, but we're going to get it done. So take a quick food break. So people always ask me, do they vegetarian food in Iceland? Come vegetarian? The answer is yes, and they have a lot more the past couple of years thanks to tourism. But somewhere like here in Siglufjörður, you have, I think, 4 restaurants total, and only 2 of them actually vegetarian options. And honestly, I love the gas station food here. It's like really amazing. So I usually go to Alles to get like veggie burgers, but I found a pizza, which I'm very excited about. Yummy and needed. Much better. Now we've got a happy belly. It should be noted, Nordic Noir
We'll have some of the elements. Very few of them will have all of them.
Well, there is something else I wanted to mention. It's not considered a key ingredient, but it is something that I think is contributing to its success.
There's often also kind of short sentences, not purple prose.
It's realistic, it's simple, and it's precise. So Nordic Noir has actually been around for a really long time, but also a really short time too. Let me explain. So Nordic crime fiction actually dates back to 1800s with work coming out of both Norway and Denmark. Now it'll be like, jump over a couple centuries and we go to after World War II, you now have police protocols. Now this is actually looking at the investigative process of a police officer. So this is actually really common with the work of American author Ed McBain. And that really kind of like laid the foundation for what we know of Nordic Noir. Now we just jump the timeline again to 1960s, where we meet Swedish author duo Mace Fowell and Per Walu. Apologies to my Swedish friends if I'm saying it wrong. I'm trying really hard, but they actually translated several of Ed McBain's novels into Swedish. In doing so, they created a structure where they could explore the changing Swedish folkhem through the struggles of the defective detective. Now, folkhem translates to people's home. And people's home is a reference to the Swedish version of the Nordic welfare state. And this things get really interesting.
The concept of the people's home captures what the Social Democrats wanted to offer already in the 1930s. That is, a place where everyone is free and equal, but where everyone is taken care of and takes care of others. And in the world on screen, the ideal of the people's home is dead or in the process of dying.
That's Jaakko. He's a researcher and adjunct professor of film and television at the University of Helsinki. While his work is focused on Nordic Noir storytelling on the screen, many of the same principles exist across all mediums.
They kind of set the bar for Scandinavian crime fiction in the sense that I think they were socialists and they wanted to get their message across. And I decided on crime fiction is a good way of discussing social ills without being like a boring research paper.
So now I want to come back to the fifth element and connect it. This was like E.T. when they did the little finger thing, connected to people's homes. What really makes Nordic Noir is the social critique on society and kind of have this like laser focus on kind of the breakdown of the traditional welfare state model in the Nordics. And it was the work of Mace Fowell and Per Walu that really actually created this entire new genre. I know, you're probably thinking, breakdown of a welfare state. I know, but we're going to go a little bit deeper so we can find the answers.
Fall of the Soviet Union caused a big identity crisis here in the Nordic region because the Nordic welfare state had been understood as a compromise between capitalism and communism. You know, it was a midpoint between East and West. But when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, things changed drastically. And as I see it, this was the beginning of a new era of uncertainty, an era when old truths and values were questioned and the identity of the region had to be reinvented. People understood that things have changed, that the region is not what it was in the past. And Nordic Noir discusses and comments uncertainties caused by this new era in which we live. It represents our fears and worries and also guides us to make sense of them. So
Fowell and Per Walu explicitly use their crime novels to criticize the weakness of the Swedish welfare state to capitalism. Henry Mankell, who is considered the modern-day father of Nordic Noir after Fowell and Walu, created the Wallander series, which has adaptations on both Netflix and BBC. One of the core critiques of his work is looking at the rise of xenophobia in Sweden. And we're seeing it play out in real time with the burning of the Koran this past spring at a far-right anti-Muslim rally in southern Sweden. But what about authors today?
Like they say, I have a mild critique to some issues of society, and that's probably true. I'm there to show life as it is. But what is interesting about the Greenlandic society is how elegantly you actually negotiate with the things that must come from time to time when you have a situation between one country there as a colonizer for many years, but also a stronger and stronger more independent country like Greenland it is, but you still have tensions from time to time. Mm-hmm. But I think people in general, they manage very well. I am here to write a good story and show the country that I really, really respect and love.
Not so much criticizing like society, how it's built, but it's more like the humans, like how do they behave because of inequality in the society.
My observation is some of the, we'll call OGs in the space, right? The authors that really push this genre forward. The social critiques seem to be more overt and more directed. It seems to be more subtle these days.
I don't want to preach. It's there. It's one of the layers of the story. I don't want my characters to be like this, like a horn, where I'm shouting through them about something that I think about the world, like on political things.
Don't do it like in every single book. When you do take on a social issue, you have to be very careful to realize that there are always opposing views, and you don't want to stand on a soapbox and tell the reader, like, this is what you should think about this issue. Yeah.
And it might go back to why they became writers in the first place. All admittedly writing a genre they enjoy as a reader, but none with a socialist agenda. Emil, an Icelandic writer of crime fantasy and horror, he was the only one who's been fascinated by storytelling his whole life. Ursa was an engineer and first started writing children's novels because, well, her grandson wasn't reading. And Satu, who worked largely in tourism marketing, she began writing about her new life in Iceland via a blog and several books. And it was actually being unable to travel during COVID and wanting a new challenge, thus, Hildur was born. And Nina, she worked in tourism and government before she found her calling.
Presumptions in Denmark about what Greenland is and what it isn't, and what Greenlanders are and what they aren't. And it didn't really match with what I knew. Everyday life in Greenland is not so far from what we know in the rest of Scandinavia, only it is also a culture that is very different because it has an indigenous point of departure. And that I thought was very frustrating. What can I do in order to make the picture of Greenland much more nuanced, much widen it, and actually tell about what real Greenland is like?
This is something that's really important in the work that I do, especially for a place like Greenland, where I too have felt my experiences differ drastically from the stereotypes from the Danish media. So I want to showcase the true life of the people there and the rest of the Nordics. It's also on TV too, like The Bridge. I know I keep jumping ahead to TV, but honestly, it's all linked. Also, I love this town.
In the first episodes of The Bridge, the so-called truth asks inconvenient questions about the current state of the Nordic welfare states, suggesting that they are not as equal and fair as people often think they are.
I know that was a lot, so we're going to do a really quick 3-second go break. Oh, you wanted to see real ones? My bad. Look at you two, troublemakers. I really love goats, by the way, and it's actually a dream of mine to have a goat farm right here in Iceland. So while that seems dark and gloomy, I like these guys. The genre has actually ridden a huge wave of success since the 1990s. According to Nordics Info, a knowledge hub that's part of Aarhus University in Denmark, social critique ends up being the thing that actually fascinates readers and coincides with this sort of wider fascination with this sort of deemed successful Nordic welfare state.
Many of whom are, tired of hearing how fantastic the Nordic countries are. People abroad have been bombarded with arguments that the Nordic countries are the happiest countries in the world, the Nordic countries are the safest countries in the world, they are the cleanest countries in the world, and so on and on.
Nordic Noir is moving away from these sort of projected positive images of these countries and really showcasing their flaws and their struggles. It ultimately challenges the concept of Nordic Exceptionalism, which we'll explore in another video.
It's like being invited, I don't know, to a palace of some king or queen, and they're lifting up the carpet and they're like worms.
Well, one very important thing to keep in mind, statistically, these countries are still very safe, and the welfare state, it's not dead.
The welfare state is still there and it works just fine. I think you can call the welfare state the good object, yet we are afraid that we are about to lose something precious as neoliberalism and globalization are shaping the region. This is what Nordic Noir is all about. It is about our fears of losing the Nordic welfare state.
The countries are safe, yet the stories are still rooted in realism. What do I mean? The lack of anonymity in a place like Iceland where everyone knows everyone, so it's really impossible to get away with a crime. So it therefore actually influences how the genre is developed in a place like here.
Everyone that goes missing is noticed, so we don't have vulnerable, like a group of vulnerable women that you could prey upon and that sort of thing. So that's off the table. You can't really write about a serial killer. You cannot write about organized crime gang.
Police officers, they don't carry, so they don't carry in my story either. Or if there's somebody here in Westfjords, in the small village. You have to stand with person's body as long as the technical research group comes from Reykjavik. I just have to put some guy watching the body as long as the helicopter can land.
Also may stop your character from running down the street in Greenland. Crazy, right?
Very few roads, and they're just inside the towns and cities, so it wouldn't give much sense, because you just run round and round.
So I just want to plug that other video if you haven't seen it yet, because one of the challenges and opportunities, I would say, with being in Greenland is because there is no sort of real road network the way that we are used to a lot of the larger countries, that the way that you get around is by boats, it's by plane, by helicopter, snowmobile, dog sled, a lot of fun ways. And because there is no roads. But there is a new project that they are working on, which will create the first road between two towns. So you have to watch the video and see. Every author I spoke to mentioned they write for a local audience. So for Ursa and Emil, that's Iceland. For Nina, that's Denmark and Greenland. And for Satu, it's Finland. So the work is written for audience that feels safe.
Read a book about the terrible things that happens to some people. What have you? And you have had a peep into a world that is really, really dangerous. But now it's closed again. You can relax and, everything ended well. And you can go out in your Nordic society feeling safe because you are safe. And I think that's why this genre, the crime genre, is quite big up here, because we are simply so privileged to live in very safe, rich countries.
Another reason for its possible success is this term called Femikrimi, crime novels with a female protagonist written by a woman.
Was never a question that I wanted to write about a female. And when I was writing the children's books, someone pointed out to me, why do you always write about a girl? Write about a boy and you'll double your sales. It's changed, thank God.
She explained to me, as well as Emil, about a Christmas tradition in the country.
It's a phenomenon in Iceland. Everybody gives books for Christmas. So, and the publishers are they're always aiming for that, between September and December. 90% of Icelandic, 70-80% of all Icelandic titles are published.
Just I am never going to write about a boy. Because I thought, what about everybody does that? And what are the little girls? Are they going to have no characters that they can relate to?
When it came to her first adult series, it was important to have a female lead paired with a male sidekick. In order for it to be real, in her words, it needed to have
all ages, all sexes.
Satu took this approach as well, though she had an additional consideration.
The main character has to be Icelandic, because we are in Iceland. It's an Icelandic police officer. I knew I cannot have the police trainee being a Finnish woman, because then everybody thinks I'm writing about myself, the Finnish woman who moved to Iceland. It's just too obvious.
But there was still a desire to create a female protagonist due to familiar territory.
The woman just somehow feels a bit closer to me. I know the woman's life a bit better.
If I have had any intention, it's also to show that women can do exactly the same. Her life was something I really could relate with, even though I haven't brought anything from my own life into her life.
Their reasons may be varied, but the intent for realism, it prevails. And what's more real than our own stories and experiences to pull from? So with the rise in popularity, it also needed a new name. And I needed a new camera. Oh my God. There's been a crime against me in Siglufjörður. Even though it's self-inflicted crime, it's still a crime. I dropped my camera trying to get that shot on the adult swing, and let's just say I broke the camera around the GoPro 10, because that camera out of commission until I hopefully get it fixed in Reykjavik. So for the video's okay, hopefully the audio's okay, because it's also raining now too. I mean, literally, look. Yeah. I'm living a Nordic Noir moment. It's fine. It's cool. Yeah. So that camera didn't get fixed in Reykjavik, sadly, for the rest of that shoot, unfortunately. But I did get a new camera just in time for the Iceland Noir event a few months later. But we had to carry on with the GoPro Hero 10. And clearly terrible settings that I didn't check beforehand. Good one, Kamari. And sorry about that, guys. Back to the story. The term originated at the University College of London by the Scandinavian department after launching both a book club and a blog. And it further gained traction after the BBC documentary called Nordic Noir, the story of Scandinavian crime fiction. Now, the internet says it's a foreign term not used in Nordics, but that wasn't quite what I heard on the streets of Reykjavik.
Here we call it Norrænar glæpasögur, which basically means the same.
The Nordic Noir is something that is even used in Finnish in Finland. It's not being translated in a Finnish way.
I met writers from Sweden and Denmark and Norway and Finland and in Iceland. We don't look at ourselves as Nordic. I think it's more the publishers try to label it as some Nordic Noir because it became popular.
So its usage seems to be a bit more of a personal preference, ? But there did seem to be more common ground around this concept that the labeling is really more of a marketing ploy. And from Ursula's perspective, a helpful one.
And sometimes you go into bookshops and you'll see like section for these novels, which has been tremendous, of course, for us. It would be difficult for example, for the Icelandic writers to get some traction, because there's so few of us.
But it's a newness that actually makes the genre very exciting.
20 years, it's just become like a regular staple in the books that are published. So many ideas still unused.
Genre is young.
Yeah, genre is young.
So even Lilia Sigurdardóttir calls the Nordic Noir a genre in creation. And I actually picked up one of her books in the store. Trap, which is about a woman who goes to Florida, which is where I went to college, and then comes back to Iceland, where I'm trying to move. I think I'm going to like this one. I found a bland, unassuming street. So Nordic Noir is actually extended into both TV and films, either through adaptations or original series. I mean, I basically was leaking it the entire time because I kept talking about Trapped. But you probably heard of it's one of the more famous ones that actually started as a Danish show and was remade for the US. Or The Bridge, which is actually Danish and Swedish co-production, and they actually created several versions of it. So you had the French-British version called Tunnel, and the US-Mexican version called Bridge. For me, oh man, look, their site. Ugh. Side where the camera broke. These are actually my favorite shows that I've watched the past couple of years, including Trapped. Yes, I keep talking about Trapped. It's a really great show, so if you haven't seen it, please watch it. Especially now, because you know where it's been filmed. Oh, and Dark Aston too. Yes, it is getting a series adaptation by Warner Brothers, I think just in Germany, or Warner Brothers Germany. It was announced last fall, and I am patiently waiting for it. I'm very excited to see who they're going to cast as the main character. Because I have a very clear vision in my head to see who it's going to be. And did you know it's actually reached gaming as well, too? Yes. So the term kind of being tossed around called game noir. So it's kind of on the same principles that you would see in Nordic Noir book, film, TV show, but it's actually also adding local folklore, which is pretty interesting. And in the words of television and film producer Ole Songberg, who's working on characters and stories for gaming, we're trying to tell some really dark secrets about humanity. In Yearwalk, which is a Swedish game, the main character goes on walk for a year, which is actually a tradition which is part of the Swedish folklore called Arsgang. When he returns, he finds out his lover has actually waiting for execution because he did the crime. Will he do the time? I think he does. It's a game. I guess you can choose your ending. Play it for yourself. Find out. Tell me how it goes. Drop in the comments. So, bringing it back to why we're here literally in Siglufjörður, this town that I love and hope to move to one day. And that question that I had, am I the only one that loves as much as I do? Copenhagen runs tours focusing on the locations from the TV series The Killing, Borgen, and The Bridge. And in Sweden, you can visit some of the sites from the Girl the Dragon Tattoo series in Stockholm. Or you can head south to Malmö to visit the bridge from, the bridge. Or you can go further south to Ystad, home to Wallander. And you can walk in the legendary steps of the main character via interactive map. In an app. I know that's a mouthful. The series has actually been attributed to about 15% of tourism to the town and has created what the locals call the Wallander effect on the region. Lastly, my love, Siglufjörður. So thankfully, there are no official tours here. But if you're like me, you're like running around trying to see all the spots, unofficially, of course. And I do feel like I'm kind of spilled the beans with doing a video here, but it's fine. You guys are going to be responsible tourists when you come here, right? And not overrun this town, right? Yes, please and thank you. And my favorite cafe in all of Reykjavik, Malumenging. I wanted to kind of wrap things up here, fitting with all the books, of course, right? Just around the story, but also the conference, because what was really fascinating to me was seeing how many people attended Iceland Noir and how many different, I would say, ethnicities, how many different nationalities, like the age spectrum as well. Just people literally from all over the world were here to kind of celebrate this genre that they are in love with, like me. So it was nice to know that I wasn't alone in my kind of obsession with Nordic Noir. I think it was really fascinating learning how this term Nordic Noir has been largely used as a marketing ploy, which I think I knew that, but it was different, like sitting in session where they're talking about that directly. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's just about having these key ingredients and people taking those ingredients and, for some, using all of them, for some, maybe not all, others, or even combining like elements of that and elements of like, say, another genre like fantasy, which is what Emil's doing. Things that we gravitate towards in these stories and people using that to build new stories. Almost feels like, again, this is my observation, like these fingers, like you could label it Nordic Noir, but there's a lot of fingers of different areas that this is going in and will continue to go in.
I needed something new. I got this idea about a medium who works with the police. I thought, wow, nobody has written an Icelandic crime fantasy. Crime fantasy is a specific subgenre that is pretty popular overseas. I thought, an Icelandic medium, because we actually have mediums in Iceland, people that say that they can communicate with elves.
Did he just say people communicate with elves? I love Iceland.
That's real. In my story, okay, I'm going to mix this urban fantasy with Nordic Noir. So by mixing those two, I could do so much more.
Another one that jumped out at me was Femikrimi. After my conversations, that's one that is even more important for us to continue to ensure that, I would say everybody meaning all genders, all races, ethnicities are seeing a strong lead, like in different roles, in different mediums. I think that's always important. And this is a good example where how we read, how we spend our money is helping to also kind of encourage, the diversity that is needed across, I would say, entire spectrum of medium and content creation. Landscape was a big one that came up. I think for me, it's a given. It's not why I read it. I think there's an expectation that I'm going to be brought back to these places that I have so many experiences. It's not why I read it, but I can see why for a lot of people it was. I think what I found more fascinating in my conversations was hearing about how you talk about nature in the context of an international and a local audience. Ursa's first adult book was just a synopsis at the time, with the first few chapters written and translated into English when it was actually sold to roughly 13 countries.
Was a little bit like, because this is before Iceland became a really popular tourist destination, and I panicked, and I thought, I have to tell all these readers how wonderful Iceland is, so they'll want to come here, and I'll make them go whale watching. And then I thought, this is not what the publishers purchased. They didn't purchase a tour guide.
So she stuck to her mission about writing for a local audience and making adaptations to the script where needed when translated into other languages. And Saftey's in a similar position as well.
I'm a foreigner, and I have been writing from Iceland to abroad, to Finland. This book will be ever translated, or the series, in Icelandic. I have to edit the manuscript.
But Nina actually has to write for two main audiences, Greenlanders and Danes.
I should not tell a lot about Greenland that is very obvious for Greenlanders because they will get very bored. I should also be careful not to be too Greenlandic focused, because so people outside, they would say, what is going on? I don't understand it. So the challenge lies in explaining without patronizing, or that's why it's important to have people from outside, from both countries, to read what I do.
And finally, what stood out to me most during the event, besides the custom cocktails, of course, was a social critique. If you haven't figured this out by now, this is not a travel show. I'm going to showcase some of my favorite locations, but ultimately I'm here to tell real stories about people, the culture, the history, and at the same time, just showcase the truth, which may not always be pretty. And for me, I've traveled so much in this area, but specifically in Iceland over the years. And there has been a reckoning that I've had to undergo myself, of realizing that this place isn't perfect and this place has, flaws, it has issues. In the winter of 2021, when I was in town before flying up to Siglufjörður, my friends told me to be careful at the bars in town because there was a rise in date being used. And they talked about how unsettled they felt with the recent murder of somebody execution style in front of his home 9 times. Now, though Ursa mentioned organized crime hasn't been a topic that really could be explored in Nordic Noir in the country due to its lack of realism, she acknowledged a changing tide around this. Organized crime is becoming an area of growing concern in the country. Now, 2 months prior to this event, the police arrested 4 Icelandic men plotting an attack specifically against the labor lead and head of the Socialist Party, where they seized about 12 firearms, including some assembled with 3D print components. Now, printing of 3D was something my friends told me about a few months prior, as it was gaining traction in the country. And I share it with you just to showcase that Iceland is like any other country in the world. And these are real social issues that are happening in the country. And when you look at some of these studies by like CNN, where they're saying the top and the happiest places in the country, it's never qualified, right? It's really just said broadly. For me personally, this is what I enjoy about the books, is it's kind of challenging that, right? It's challenging this idea that these places are perfect, and we're showcasing, again, the dark underbellies, which is an important conversation to have. My point here is the real Iceland isn't what you're going to see on Instagram or YouTube. Yeah, you're going to see a part of it. You're going to see nature, and it's stunning, and it's beautiful, and it's why I started coming here and why I fell in love with my experience, because it is really magical. But there's so much more depth and there's so much more truth if we would just peel back the layers. And what Nordic Noir is doing is allowing us to see they're just like any other place. It has challenges. That doesn't stop me from wanting to move here. I still absolutely see a life here. For me, reading these novels is allowing this to have a more grounded view and perspective of Iceland. And ultimately, that's why I read the books. So after several months of research and interviews and 2 trips to Iceland and a broken camera and a little bit of broken spirit there for a few days, I finally found my answer of why I read Nordic Noir. It was the start of a beautiful day. Thomas's wife had just decided to move to Reykjavik to study. He wasn't going with her, not right away at least. He wasn't ready to leave Siglufjörður just yet. Me either.